знаю про то,
Hello.
что есть возможность задавать вопросы. Вопросы любые вообще про SOC, про EDR, про
You can ask me all sorts of questions about EDR and SOCs and whatever.
Времени на доклад побольше, чтобы потом было
I have
дискутировать именно
budgeted a lot of time for this presentation so that we can actually have a debate, because as they say, truth is born in disputes.
как они используют
So
соки,
any
что SOC
DRs or XDR
с вашей точки
solutions
зрения, с точки зрения
can be
вендора,
the
возможности
subject
у вендора.
of your
Буду рад на них
questions.
ответить.
I shall be happy to field them if I
И,
can.
собственно, и тематика сегодняшнего выступления моего — это что в первую
Now, the
очередь
subject of
SOC
my
хочет от
presentation
DRR
today
решений,
is what
какие из
do
классов DRR
SOCs
решений могут друг
expect?
друга заменять,
Which kinds
дополнять,
of
нужно
classes
одно,
of
несколько.
DR solutions can
Вот
be
об этом сегодня
required?
и
Can you
поговорим.
complement one
Ну и,
with
собственно,
another?
подискутируем. Я надеюсь. Мы в своей компании мы занимаемся обеспечением безопасности госкорпорации.
At Rostec Information Security, we naturally provide information security services to the other entities of Rostec. Now, you probably understand that Rostec is a huge defense conglomerate in Russia. And naturally, we collect a lot of information about the landscape of threats, which is quite rich now, given what's happening politically. So it tells us a lot about, what kind of attacks are happening, what we're saying, or what perps are targeting, what IPTs are targeting, and most importantly, how we can, prevent their threats. So these are the trends. Now, we are seeing further diversification of malware, and there are well-known frameworks, and I will be talking about Cobalt in particular. Now, importantly, these frameworks keep expanding. They're already available to the majority of the markets, and there is a whole market on darknet around selling zero-day vulns and what have you. There are also cyber mercenaries, and their qualifications, their competencies are developing. Fortunately, we are developing ours as well. We are seeing further sophistication of attacks. Everybody knows those trended vulnerabilities, but every month we are seeing further increase, and we keep talking about how to address that and what kind of telemetry data to collect. But all this we have to contend with. The most interesting thing we are seeing, and I guess you're all reading the news, that the number of conflicts at different levels, so to speak, on this little planet keeps growing.
Между двумя группировками различными, какие бы они ни были, попадают иногда ребята, инфраструктуры.
And caught in crossfire very often are people and organizations have got nothing to do with the initial conflict to start with, but this is how conflicts escalate. There is always some collateral damage.
Тренд на расширение услуг, сервисов ИБ, он очевиден.
So we are seeing further demand or further increase in demand for cyber protection or cyber security services. Well, in Russia alone, this market is like 470 billion rubles. Now, what are we going to do about it? So what kind of tools do we need? Who provides most information? Which kind of solutions can be used interchangeably? So in order to properly, withstand those attacks, and in order to be able to come up with the relevant correlation rules and detection rules, and what have you, and find the correct IOCs, now that requires having a proper understanding of the incident as it unfolds, particularly if it's your first ever. So we effectively need to develop a tree like this, which will show, who is doing what, which source they originated from, and which asset they're currently interacting with, what kind of authorizations do they have, what kind of server was compromised, what kind of services were triggered. This timeline needs to be developed in order for us to be able to prevent such occurrences in the future, at least react faster. Now, where do we find the information to, fill this tree out and effectively develop the right rule to detect and respond? So we'll be talking about the sensors needed, what type of, NTA, NDR, EDR solutions required, and so on.
Да, чтобы вот эту картинку составить для себя, понять.
Like, where does an analyst start? So that, they want to kind of explain it to the internal users, or maybe SOC. Like, what kind of an admissible event has just happened? So all this telemetry needs to be collected, obviously. In order to understand what's required, we naturally need to understand what are the classical objectives, tasks, if you like, of NDR and EDR. If you have questions about XDR, we'll try to cover them separately. Let's start with EDR. Now, the classical EDR collects all telemetry. It's not enough to, simply rely on Sysmon. I mean, some organizations probably are okay with that, not our case, obviously. So proper EDR should be able to go through all assets of your file system, network, registry, various logs. If you have agents at endpoints, it would be weird not to collect the logs, so to speak. Next, you do discovery. Obviously, we need to identify the vulns and do the snapshots. Maybe, they've installed some persistence software, so we need to have alerts generate. Sometimes things seem to be happening legitimately, like, they install perfectly legitimate software for remote administration, but you do know what it leads to, don't you? And then, everything may look very legit, and they may be even using something that appears to be legit telemetry. Next one is indicators of attack, indicators of compromise. Obviously, this goes without saying. Finally, reacting or response. Otherwise, we wouldn't be even talking about DR solutions, because R in DR stands for response. So we gotta study the process. We gotta have the interactive console so that we can quickly say grab information from some file. So EDR solutions must be capable of all that. Now, everything I'm covering here is based on the experience of a CP provider. So these are must-have requirements for EDRs. And naturally, products are different. Some of them are not good, for example, at dealing with ransomware. But the idea is that the product should be mature. Now let's look at network DR solutions. Naturally, they should be able to grab network traffic. They should also be able to, monitor different types of connections, do NetStream and whatever. Geolocation and retrospective analysis are also requirements. Like, you should be able to upload a new IOC and see if the same sort of user was there like last week. And also traffic analyzers, your regular grub, so to speak, back from 1990s. Most importantly, response. You want integration with other systems such as SOR and CM, so that, you can block stuff with the press of a button. And node isolation, I'm sorry. So if, for example, it's somewhere in the border segment. Then finally, sending various commands, like I'm giving here a specific example of a browser and, activity starting at 7 o'clock in the morning. And you can easily replace the browser here with so many other things.
Заключаться. Ну и вот теперь с точки зрения аналитика SOC-центра. Что ему...
Now let's put ourselves in the shoes of an analyst of an SOC. What do they need first and foremost? Where will they go looking in order to understand what's happening in the infrastructure? I will consider here some practical cases we have seen. And, kind of mundane, but then it will be easier for you to kind of relate to them. Say, addressing a malicious domain or a CNC center. So EDR can block a connection only for a particular host, while NDR will easily block requests across the network. But EDR can give you information about whoever initiated the request and process names and the process themselves involved. Another one, propagation of an APT. Okay, so these are pretty advanced guys. So, they would offer some MS documents with juicy links. And they would do persistence and blood moves. So, what EDR will do? EDR can see and block the network connection requests on port 4445. While NDR can simply see something unusual. Like, all it says is the network movement or network activity itself. It won't be able to understand anything or do anything about alleged Windows service. Like, you see something anomalous connecting into two hosts. And then, you will need to address this host and see who initiated and who and like when they initiated and so on and so forth. And only EDR can do that. This must be the most interesting case, dated as it is though. So cobalt malware propagation. So they use RPC. And EDR is great at identifying the anomaly and can even be triggered for a blockage. However, as analysts, we'll still need to take a look at the reasons of this anomaly. We'll need host-level telemetry, and EDR is very useful in this respect. So it will tell us about a process name and how it interacted with this or that information system, or operating system, rather. Please argue with me if you feel like that. We believe, at our SOC at least, that the must-have is EDR, because 90% of attacks are targeting endpoints. And, MITRE would agree with us. Moreover, as you compromise an endpoint, you can do a lot of harm. Our calculations show that 80% of MITRE metrics can be covered with EDR capabilities and rules. It's actually a conservative estimate. If you check out some presentations by various vendors, you can see that what they're quoting is up to 90%. And naturally, we want to be Pareto on that. We want to cover most ground with as few tools as possible. Now let's talk about individual objects. Why EDR?
Как аналитики могут работать с процессов. Теперь пойдем по технике с точки зрения операционной системы. EDR как сенсор может работать.
So EDR as a sensor can easily, or at least should be able to interact with pretty much everything. I've given a screenshot here, like event subtypes, for example. All this should be parsable by your EDR. It should also be able to attach its own IOAs and rules to it and respond, even, without the involvement of the analyst.
Чем же тут, кстати, и в зависимости от зрелости продукта, чем он может заместить?
Now, depending on the maturity of the product, how can it replace NDR? Like, it can block, for example, your network connections and can generate alerts, ports and protocols. A good product will be able to parse it all. This way, you get a host-level IDS. Push piece out here.
Сейчас забыл следующий слайд. Вернемся к этому. Опять же, EDR, должен уметь строить
EDR should be good at building the process tree. Now imagine
От одного родителя это легитимно, из другого родителя нелегитимно.
That a process can be legitimate if it's triggered by a particular process, and illegitimate if it's triggered by another process. So that means you need to have a process tree. Like a bash originating from an Nginx process is weird.
Ну и вот последнее, да, наверное, с точки зрения сенсора.
My last point about sensors.
Напомню, подведу итоги, что все-таки огромное обогащение играет самую важную роль. И его
Now, augmentation is extremely important.
Да? Ну и, соответственно, доупом, дополнительным бонусом в хороших средствах
And an additional bonus
информация, то есть предоставление информации по всем установленным ПОшкам и
involves, for example, provision of information on all the software as well as a vulnerability mapping. Like NDR can see an exploitation attempt on a server, and the big question you should be asking yourself is whether this particular server is running the software that somebody is trying to exploit or not.
И потом принимать решение. Вот. Опять же, эту информацию может дать только хостовой сенсор.
And only host-level sensor can provide this data.
Внедрение DR-решений, как
Now, priorities.
на этом с чего начать и чем продолжить, да?
Where do you start?
Опять же, я говорю про наш опыт. Все-таки
At least our experience shows that you got to start with EDR.
Что инфраструктура большая, не все можем.
Now, if you have large infrastructure and you feel that you haven't really covered everything and you have, shall I say, shadow IT, so if you're not comfortable with the coverage, and in many cases, particularly in industrial companies, you will see that you simply cannot install enough sensors. Now imagine that your older machinery is running some Windows XP systems and full load. But then you will possibly want to do NDR as well, and it's ultimately a pretty difficult balancing act. Now, if you are very mature and you've got everything covered, you may want to install XDR as well and do an integration of different solutions. They will be a great fit for each other. And, you will take your cybersecurity to a different level, to a different league. Let me summarize here. Can EDR replace NDR? My answer is somewhat provocative. Yes, it can, though there are some strings attached. Like you gotta cover your whole infrastructure, you gotta have a mature EDR that is able to look at numerous subsystems, that can attach lots of IOAs, that can integrate with lots and lots of systems, and it should also have open API so that your analyst doesn't have to do a lot of manual work looking by the name, for example, of host. Particularly if you have like host names such as server 1, blah, blah, blah.
где есть нормальная приоритизация IT-активов, CMDB, эти все...
So if you have, proper CMDB, if you're doing your stock-taking exercises on a regular basis, and so on.
Ну и последний слайд не успел, к сожалению, доделать.
My last slide.
Отвечая на вопрос, а как в связи с этим должны или могут масштабироваться, изменяться, или наоборот,
And how then
сужаться команды...
should we scale or optimize the SOC teams? I believe that what's going to happen here is similar to what we're seeing in so many other verticals. I'm talking about line 1. I think that line 1 will soon be phased out of SOCs. And I think it's only natural. The same we see in the other industries.
Первая линия обслуживания, она уходит.
Line 1 is being replaced. I mean, the robots are taking up those jobs. This is certainly happening in Moscow. I think this will be happening pretty soon in other cities. I believe the same is going to happen at SOCs. The IT industry is pretty young, and some processes are just speeding up. I believe that the boundary between L1 and L2, L2 and L3 will be blurred. I'm not so sure about L2, L3 border, but L1, L2 for sure. A good analyst at the SOC of the future will need to pass a pretty rigorous onboarding process. So he will get like a copy of the traffic and a copy of incident list, and it'll take him like 3 months to go through it. So this will be a rigorous onboarding process. He'll see how EDR responds to all that. What individual subsystems, for example, are responsible for that, and after that, he will join the cohort that, in a pretty relaxed way, will see what has come filtered by EDR, NDR, and XDR, and will leverage their creative capabilities and their knowledge to provide recommendations to the clients, whoever they are. And maybe they will also be in an argument with their colleagues, talking about the best way to address this incident without generating too many FPs for their users. That's how I see the development of the SOC of the future. And last thing I want to add here is that, and that's my personal opinion, that it's impossible to build a high-quality SOC without EDR solutions. That's it for me. Thank you.
Да, Алексей, спасибо. Вопросы есть, но я пользуюсь правом.
Yes, thank you, Aleksey.
Свой вопрос. Я очень
I want to ask my own question here, abusing my position as an MC. I found your presentation so riveting. You made this disclaimer that EDR is only efficient when it has a proper infrastructure coverage. How do we get there, though?
Бывает решений развернуты, я имею в виду агентов, особенно, как нам...
When in many companies you simply don't have enough agents. And how do we go with EDR into the high-load segments?
Как зайти в высоконагруженный сегмент? Есть понятные условия
in the high-load segment,
правила фильтрации, их надо
there are filtration rules and conditions. You gotta pre-configure them, and test them. It won't take long.
Влияние на высоконагруженный сервис DR-решением, его можно контролировать, это 100%.
And the impact you will have on a high-load service with your EDR can be controlled.
Это очень сложно.
How do you ensure 100% coverage? Now, this is a trick question, particularly if you are doing it in-house.
Например, не доросло или MSSP.
Particularly if your in-house team is not there yet, or like if your MCCP is ready for everything, but the client is not.
Проводить сканирование.
It's a long journey, I guess. You gotta do scanning and inventory talking. It's a long process for sure, particularly if you're talking about large infrastructure where you have over 1,000 assets. Statistics show that you will have serious problems with this infrastructure like this. You will be strapped for resources. You won't have enough talent.
Как говорит президент, что-то сделать невозможно, но стремиться к этому надо.
And you know what?
Может быть, из технологий что-то...
Some things cannot be done, but they should still be a true north.
Для распространения именно агентов.
Для
распространения агентов.
Для распространения.
What do you do in order to install more agents?
Очень много всегда зависит от
Actually, a lot depends on
функциональных возможностей у самого заказчика. Я сейчас буду...
availability of some functional capabilities.
Чаще всего, конечно, это там два варианта.
In most cases, it will be one of the two options. It's either, that you've got antivirus agents already up and running, and then, you can effectively, install a package for installation. There could be some nuances, some things will work, others won't, but, you test it a bit, you develop a practicable solution. If we're talking about Linux infrastructure, for example, there will be some, Ansible playbooks with SSH and other types of access, and antivirus systems that are good at that as well, which can be leveraged for installation purposes as well. And if you have Windows-only infrastructure,
через групповые политики.
Or you can use group policies for that. That should get like 99% of the job done. But it doesn't really solve the problem of you not being aware of some elements in the infrastructure. Like if you have some EMDB left over, and NDR probably will not see your shadow IT either. And, a perpetrator can, easily operate it without it even being visible. You will connect to it directly bypassing the firewall. So pen testing should help in this respect. A question from the audience. To what extent does the use or is the use of EDR protect you from containers or container-level attacks? There have been cases like this. It's difficult for me to answer the question because there haven't been enough cases of this kind. That's the next technological challenge to EDR systems. Dealing not just with containers, but with rather containerized environments. Technologically, it's quite challenging. This is something we are working on. I know a couple other vendors who are also working on that. That's the SOC of the future for you, because so much is transitioning now to the PaaS model. So it needs to be addressed. We'll need to learn how to do that, for sure. DR solutions need to find a way of dealing with that. Most vendors at the moment do not have proper solutions for that, more like band-aids.
Как раз по твоему рассказу,
Thank you. Next one.
вы вкладываете в понятие 80% покрытия МИТРа.
What's your understanding of this 80% coverage?
Хотя бы одного правила или...
Are you talking about having just a single rule or what? No, I'm talking about TTPs, like atomary activities, such as, say, doing a dump. But there are also non-atomary ones. Like first, first they do reconnaissance, then they do an attack. You check the MITRE matrix, you see which kind of techniques have been used, what they used on. So my understanding is that if you have a rule for a chain, well, that's coverage. Which means that you should have at least one rule for every technique, at least. So, you gotta be integrated with TI and the feed suppliers. How come EDR is not integrated with the sandbox in your concept? Well, it can be integrated. It's actually great if it's integrated. But then I haven't seen enough infrastructures like this where you already have the sandbox there. But it's integratable for sure, and it should be integrated. In my last slide, you should probably see EDR, NDR, and XDR. So XDR sort of assumes that you have EDR and NDR integrated with the sandbox, so that NDR can send some things for checking, or the sandbox can do that, and send something to the integrated TI that, the file we inspected, shows this anomalous behavior. It's just a matter of maturity, really. And, some companies take years to do that. What do you think about using MSR or EDR for mail? At the host level or mail service level? Actually, it will work both ways. I mean, it's trendy for sure. But you know what? Endpoint DR solutions, antivirus systems, they already know how to do that. I don't really think it's a standalone product class. Although it's in your name.
Как много событий генерирует EDR обычно?
How many events are usually generated by an EDR?
Интересный вопрос, а сколько из них...
Doesn't it depend? And how many of them are useful? I can answer this question in two ways. A, it depends on the caliber of your EDR. Like if you have all the toggles on, it can generate a lot. But if you profile everything properly, the infrastructure, the host, the events, then I can tell about our own experience. We can do like 0.5 to 1 EPS per host, and it can be up to 4 EPS for servers. Again, much depends on the kind of equipment we're talking about. So if it's like a small installation of 1C, which is a accounting system, or it could be a high-load server servicing lots of clients, or a terminal. However, it's always or it should always be configurable. EDR solution should have a function for switching telemetry on and off when needed. Like when I see that an attack is running, and then I will want everything to be logged. And yes, it will swamp me under events, and I will take a week to sort of decipher it or analyze it all, and then I will switch it off. So people are trying to participate in this discussion. So how do we cover 99% of infrastructure if we're running Mac OS? I'm not a fan of Mac. See, I've got a Samsung phone here.
Я не готов ответить на этот вопрос.
In fact, Macs are prohibited in my company. How about I just skip your question? Can I do that? Because I won't be able to answer it in short.
Долго можно думать над этим, но вообще покажите мне атаки нормальные на macOS.
And now tell me if there have been some serious attacks targeting Mac OS. Now let's talk about a framework which has EDR inbuilt into it. Please meet me at my booth. I'll be happy to continue this debate. Thank you.